In this session, we will consider using the educative mentoring. What do you understand by an educative mentoring approach? Pause the presentation and reflect for a few moments, maybe make some notes, and then when you're ready, restart and we'll look at this together. Here are some of the ideas that I have. Educative mentoring approach is critical friendship, collaborative partnership, analysing experience together, focused on pupil learning, moving from learn that, the content, to learn how to, putting it in. Research findings indicate that the activities of mentoring. When teaching mentees how to plan lessons, traditionally, mentors have shown mentees their plans, described activities, and provided feedback on a plan that a mentee has subsequently developed, which informs the mentee of what to do when. However, to help the mentee to also understand why and how to plan, educative mentors co-plan collaboratively with their mentees. So this is an activity to do together, i.e. joint work, where mentees and mentors are collaborating on authentic teaching activities, and they interrogate, explain, and justify their practice together. They develop a more reciprocal and less hierarchical mentoring relationship, enabling them to learn from one another as co-learners. These activities have been seen to encourage professional discourse about teaching and learning. Thinking aloud is when mentors share their ideas about issues, how they interpret what children say and do, and making connections between different experiences. This helps your mentee to understand how a teacher with a more sophisticated cognitive map of teaching and learning perceives an event in the classroom. The mentor will share thoughts, questions, and wanderings whilst co-planning, and they will make reflections on their own teaching visible. Exploring content. Mentors probe the thinking of their mentees and encourage them to articulate the rationale for their practice. Focus on pupils' learning rather than on the teaching performance. To an educative mentoring conversation that we have modelled for you.
Hi Julia, it's good to see you.
I'm fine
beforehand.
Good. Let's have a look at the next lesson that you're going to be observing when I'm teaching. We're going to plan it together so that you can understand why I've chosen to teach it the way I have. Okay?
Lovely, and that's science tomorrow afternoon.
Yes, that's right. We're going to use your lesson planning form. I expect you've got one available from your university forms. Yeah, brilliant. So my first thought here is, where have we got to in the last lesson? What do we need to cover in this lesson? And where does that fit in with the scheme for this half term? I wonder, have you got the scheme of work to hand?
I have. So last lesson, we were making some simple food chain diagrams using pictures from the book and putting them in the right order and adding some arrows. The lesson that we're going to do this week, we were, as we discussed, we're thinking about going to the school wildlife area, and we're going to try and help them to build simple food chains based on what we see there. And then we're going to follow that with some lessons about habitats and what happens when habitats are destroyed.
Great, okay. So next I would think about how that last lesson went. Were there any aspects that need revisiting really?
So how do you decide what actually needs revisiting?
Well, I think about any individuals in the class who were struggling with some part of the lesson and which things were new to them and which things we could review to strengthen their recall. I look if anyone's missed the lesson as well, because they might need some additional support.
And have you written that on your plan?
Well, no, actually at this stage, I wouldn't have written anything on my plan because I usually think through these steps without any notes. But it really would be a good idea for you to make some notes at first, and they can go on the top of your plan so that you keep them in mind. And I don't mind if you write lots of stuff down at the moment, okay? Because it's more important to capture it at this time. And after a while, it'll become more automatic to you, just like when you learnt to drive, okay?
Yeah. So the last lesson, Jamie wasn't there. And there was one person that I noticed in the lesson, Cara. She found the new vocabulary really difficult. She was really unsure about the terms producer and predator and prey, and she got in a real muddle. And there were quite a few children that I noticed were putting the arrows the wrong way around on their food chain diagram. So I know some of them aren't quite there yet.
Good, good. Well done noticing that. So I'm going to plan a starter activity to revisit the new words that we learned last lesson, but I need it to be fun and engaging so that Cara isn't put off right at the beginning of the lesson, and it can help set the pace for the lesson. I don't want it to drag.
Yeah. So the learning objective on our scheme of work is to construct and interpret a variety of food chains, identifying producers, predators and prey.
How do you feel about what we're going to cover? Are you familiar with these concepts?
Actually, with these, because it's biology, I actually feel quite confident because I did A-level biology and I really enjoyed it. So, you know, I feel quite confident and, you know, I have been thinking about it. So I think my initial thoughts were maybe we could get the pupils to choose an animal they find in the wildlife area and perhaps to draw the habitat it lives in, and then to construct a food chain.
That's a promising idea, but there are a few things that we're going to need to consider. For example, how will they know what that creature eats? And how are they going to access that information in the wildlife area?
Yes, I was sort of thinking they might already know some of that, but I think you're right. Some of them that's going to be quite difficult because we might find some things that we're not familiar with. So would it be a good idea maybe to split the lesson? Could we do like some of the practical things in the wildlife area and then maybe do some research back in the classroom?
Okay, that's good. How would you want them to record the work? Do you want them to do a food chain in their books so everybody's got their own one, or do you want them to work in groups and make posters for display? What do you think?
Well, I think it would be really nice to have a display, and we don't have to have something in their books all the time, do we? You know, I would quite like to do some kind of poster.
Okay. Well, that will take much longer, and as it happens, we could spend longer tomorrow. So if we decide posters, we've got to now decide, are they going to do one each, or do we want them to work together in groups? And that brings in another question, and that's how will we assess their work? Because we need to know what each of them have learned, and that's much harder when it's in group work. So, so we need to decide if the poster is going to be used for assessing their learning, or whether we maybe use a different way to assess their learning. We could do it orally at the end of the lesson. So what do we want to know that the pupils can do by the end of the lesson?
Well, if I think about the objective, I want to know that they can construct a food chain and that they can correctly label it using that vocabulary. And I also want to use this as an opportunity for them to start thinking about beyond a food chain into a food web, so that we can start thinking about habitats.
Okay, so how could we assess whether they have learnt that?
I think you're right. I think that would be quite hard if they're doing that as a group poster. So maybe it would be useful for them to each record something, and then I can use that to check they all understand the key terms. But I wonder if there's a way to combine it. combine their posters to make some kind of display showing maybe showing the different food chains in the wildlife area, and then we could always refer back to that when we talk about habitats.
Oh, that's a nice idea. Good. Okay, so this is coming on nice. I'm looking forward to this lesson. How will they know what a good poster looks like when it's finished? I think that's quite a helpful thing to consider.
I think maybe I could mock up a little example and share something really simple, and actually that would give me the opportunity to model using the arrows again, because as I said, there were quite a lot of children that couldn't do that, and it means that I can go back through the key terms.
Well done, thank you. Okay, I think that's really good, Julia. And so I think this is a good place for us to pause, because I don't notice you hadn't written anything down on your lesson plan, and I think it might be useful for you to be writing some stuff down, because actually I'm going to need to write some stuff down now, and then we can have another chat. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Here you can see a table that might help you think about. Our suggestion is that that table might well be very useful. These are the references from which this presentation